Hello. So, inspired in part by Loading Ready Run's segment Talking Simulator, I decided to give it a shot of live playing a game and talking about some things that I found interesting about the way the game presents itself. I thought for my first exercise in this, I'd start with Assassin's Creed, because I recently have the Restored Edition, and it looks pretty nice, and it's also a game which does a lot of stuff interestingly bad. So I thought it would be fun to go back to look at this game franchise that I have very strong feelings about, but which has done nothing but disappoint me for 10 years. I originally recorded from literally the jump, the loading, the opening cutscene and everything, but the problem with that is it's so heavily talky that I spent most of my time politely waiting for NPCs to finish their conversations, which meant that, you know, there was a giant chunk of this time during which I was basically sitting very quietly along with you. But with that in mind, the basic runny, jumpy, climby tutorial stuff is all out of the way, and we're gonna check out the first mission of Assassin's Creed and talk about what in this I know stuff about that I find interesting. So first of all, the interface, the idea of being in a big coordinating thinking machine that it actualizes the game metaphor, that's interesting.
Alive. But I saw you stab me. Felt death's embrace.
You saw what I wanted you to see, and then you slept the sleep of the dead, of the womb. That you
Ew.
could wake and be reborn.
To what end?
Do you remember, Altair, what it is
By the way,
assassins fight for?
that question, to what end, never gets a meaningful answer.
In all things. It is not enough to end the violence one man commits upon another. It refers to peace within as well. You cannot have one without the other.
So it is said.
So it is! But you, my son, have not found inner peace. Manifests in ugly ways. You are arrogant and overconfident.
Were you not the one to say that nothing is true and everything is permitted?
You do not understand the true meaning of the phrase, my child. It does not grant you the freedom to do as you wish. It is a knowledge meant to guide your senses. It expects a wisdom you clearly lack.
Then what is to become of me?
I should kill you for the pain you brought upon us. Alec thinks it only fair. Your life in exchange for his brother's. But this will be a waste of my time and your talents. You will see you have been stripped of your possessions, your rank as well. You are a novice, a child once more, as you were on the day you first joined our order. I am offering you a chance at redemption. You'll earn your way back into the Brotherhood.
I assume you've something planned.
First, you must prove to me you remember how to be an assassin.
So you'd have me take a life?
No, not yet at least. For now, you're to become a student once again.
There is no need for this.
Others track your targets for you, but no more. From today on, you will track them yourself.
If this is what you wish,
It is.
then tell me what it is that I must do.
We have been betrayed. Someone was assisting Robert de Sable, one of our own. You must find him and bring him here for questioning.
What can you tell me of the traitor?
But that's just it. I've given you all I will. The rest is up to you.
So there is so here we have an interesting kickoff point. In the context of this cutscene, what previously had just happened was Murder Daddy here had got us in the central meeting location for the assassins, berated me for being a bad assassin boy and breaking the assassin rules that are definitely not the Assassin's Creed, and then harangued me and stabbed me to death in front of everyone. And immediately thereafter, the cutscene that directly follows is you coming to and being fine, but now being demoted and stripped of your rank. Now, a sensible human doing the storytelling would ask, okay, well, what was the point of the stabbing? Why do that? And the answer is because a Modern Warfare game did that. We really are in a 2008 game design space where the sense of cinema that you can get in a game with a certain fixed control over how things do and should work all give the director a certain need to make their game have important cinematic moments. And you get murdered in the introduction to a Modern Warfare game, so lots of other games had you get murdered in the introduction, even if they had nothing they could do with it. So Altair gets murdered in the opening of Assassin's Creed, and it is literally to no effect.
Safety and peace, Altair.
You're in my way.
Yes, Al-Mualim has asked that I assist you. Remind you how it is we hunt our prey.
I know how it works.
Be that as it may, I have no desire to disobey.
Then be quick.
The Assassin have many tools at their disposal.
Yes. We can eavesdrop, we can pickpocket, or we can use violence to intimidate.
Good, you remember.
So you'd have me walk amongst the others and learn what I can about the traitor.
Yes, begin by going to the village market. That's where we first spotted the traitor.
You know who it is?
Perhaps.
Then give me a name and let's be done with it.
That's not the way it works. Now go. And remember, begin your search in the village market.
Remember, the Murder Daddy did tell us that he was going to do nothing for us, and then proceeded to do more stuff for us. It's, it's video games. I really have strong feelings about this character and this franchise. I really quite like some of the things it wants to do and wants to be about, but it's so bad at all of them. It's quite frustrating. So, let's talk briefly about an idea from Edward Said called Orientalism. Orientalism is a book from the 70s. It's considered to be quite a seminal work in opening the discussion about Orientalism in media and research. And prior to the release of the book, it was actually super common for academics who studied the Middle East, China, Indonesia, Japan, all those places, to call themselves Orientalists. Whereas Said argued that, one, that's weird, and two, it reduced the entirety of these cultures into inhuman archetypes. It framed them as being unnatural and strange, as opposed to how they are in real life, which is they are people of a place that is exactly as complex and exactly as interesting as anywhere else. So the story of Orientalism in media is still ongoing. We're still doing all this stuff, despite the fact that the book came out in the 70s. Funnily enough, it didn't solve racism, but in the context of video games, Orientalism is one of those things we do a lot and don't like talking about how we do it. So one thing you're going to notice, if you look for it, is even games that purport to be, positive about the depictions of, say, the Middle East, still have subtle mess-ups. So this character here we have is named Altair ibn La'ahad, who is, at this point, I believe, the highest profile, possibly, Muslim character in video games, and almost certainly the most famous Syrian character in video games. Everyone in this game, who you listen to, has a really distinctive accent. Robert de Sable has a extremely French accent, and there are some British soldiers who sound a bit bloodborne-y, but broadly speaking, the accents you're going to hear are going to be one variety of Middle Eastern. Except Altair's. Altair has a really, what we consider to be a neutral accent, and that means it's probably borrowing a lot from what Americans call the Midwest accent. Now, this is a subtle version of the same idea that you see in Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, where there is everyone in that game has a Middle Eastern accent except the main character, who is very obviously British. Anyway, let's get on to our task of being an assassin for a bit. Ooh, flag. And let's hunt out a traitor. Now, one of the funny things about this is this game purports to be very open world, but all of its engagements are extremely linear, and it's even more obvious in the Desmond sections. So in this case, like, I have to sit on a bench to eavesdrop. I can't eavesdrop from on top of a building or hiding in a tree.
I know what I saw. Musoon opened the gate. He let the Templars in.
Then you must tell Al-Muallim.
I can't. Musoon did not act alone. Someone inside the fortress helped him.
What makes you say this?
He exchanges letters with someone inside. The basket weaver carries them for him.
That's no reason to stay silent.
Ah, but the weaver delivered him a letter just before the attack. I suspect it held the order to open the gate.
Then speak to the weaver. He can name Masoon's accomplice.
He's disappeared, hiding for fear of being dragged into this.
Probably inside one of his own baskets.
Why'd you laugh at that? Was that a joke? Was there something funny about probably inside one of his own baskets? No. I see. See, complaining about individual specific things in this game is really weird because, you know, I'd say it's video games. They're not going to be great at anything, but this game cost millions of dollars to make. It has a cast of thousands. It hired professionals on almost every front, so it's kind of... That was weird. It's kind of deeply weird that there's all this stuff it's so bad at. Like, you would have to assume that they know how to do a good job. But, you know, that's not the life we live.
Please, just one. We lost everything in the attack and have no place to store our grain.
I can't right now. I'm busy.
Is this about the letter?
What letter?
The letter you received when I got here. Bad news?
I don't know what you're talking about. Listen, I'll see what I can do, but please, I need to be alone right now. Come back later.
As you wish.
Alright. So, I'm kind of not a typical participant in this stuff. Hang on. I'm a member of the Assassin's Guild, guys. I'm part of the group in charge of this place. What, I can't hide in... Weird. Alright, so this pickpocket went wrong. I was about to say, I actually don't mind the pickpocket minigame in this kind of game. I actually find it kind of a fun little part of the stealth element of this game that's otherwise not very inclined towards stealth. But, stay hidden until blended. Yeah, it's a cooking direction. Okay. And now you can just go back to the task. And so the pickpocket minigame is a really interesting potential thing. They actually amp it up in the next game, in Assassin's Creed 2, where you could just wander around with your pickpocket button on, and every person you bump into will just drop some cash, which, in the context of the game having a need for money, you know, it's kind of funny in that you wind up being a hero of the people who finances, you know, revolutionary activities by pickpocketing poor street urchins like some kind of asshole.
What is that man doing?
Alright, gotta get real close. Yeah, it's a bit of an awkward one in this case, because what you basically do is you extend one hand and then you kind of just wobble it around until you tap the thing. Anyway, I still really like the way this game moves, which I think is one of the reasons why I forgive it for so much. Because as much as these people are busy bellyaching about, oh, who's this weird dude?
Who's betrayed us? You'll see. Soon, all your eyes will be opened to the truth. We stand upon the threshold between this world and a new one.
Wait, this is the guy that they had to have me find?
Equals. But man, be gone, haste. Help me!
Probably not the right way to have done that.
Anyone be so fun?
Don't do that again. Listen, I wonder what he's up. Ed! He's going to kill me! He looks like he's being chased by something. I don't want to die!
Wow, it's awkward.
I see the way you look at me. Hear the things you say. A traitor! I'm not a traitor. It's Al-Mualim who's betrayed us.
Yeah, so something in the game glitched, and as a result, I did a bad job of chasing a dude down.
All your eyes will be open
Okay.
to the truth. We
Okay.
stand upon the threshold between this world
Too
and the
close
new
to begin
one,
interrogation.
a better place where all might live as equals. But man like Al-Mualim would see this dream destroyed.
What?
Today's attack was but the first. And more will follow unless you repent.
Some invisible walls.
Rise up against the madman of Masyav. See through his lies.
This is... Oh, I see. Follow the despot to a secluded place and beat him until he speaks. Here's another one thing about these games that's always kind of funny, confusing. Their relationship to violence. So this is straight up torture, right? We are hurting someone to get them to do what we want. We are coercing someone through violence, and in a very direct, tangible way. There's no ambiguity about the scale or scope of this violence. It really is, I am going to hurt you and keep hurting you until you do what I want you to do. Bear that in mind. Like, this is seen as an acceptable method, and it will get results that I want. Bear that in mind whenever any one of these games wants to go like, well, no, there's too much bloodshed, there's been too much violence. Sup? Also, one of the other funny things about this is I'm meant to be, like, really quite competent and skilled. But this random can fist fight me hard enough to stop me.
Speak quickly then. I've no interest in your games. Why did you betray us? And who do you serve?
We serve the Templars. You should too. Their cause is just.
We?
Jamal. He told me of their plans. Asked me to open the gate.
You betrayed us. We, who called you brother and kept you safe from harm.
I did what I believed was right. And if you must kill me for it, so be it. I am not afraid to die.
Your fate is not for me to decide.
Death culty.
It's Al-Mualim who will judge.
You stand accused of betraying our brotherhood and opening the way for our enemies. How do you answer to these charges?
I deny nothing. I'm proud of what I did. My only regret is that they failed.
I offer you a chance to repent, to renounce the evil in your heart.
It is not evil in my heart, but truth. I will not repent.
Then you will die. You did well, Altair, and have earned the right to carry a blade once more.
Yeah, could you have wiped it off?
What will become of the one who helped him?
It remains to be seen. Some do ill out of ignorance or fear. These men can be saved. Others suffer from corrupted wills, their minds poisoned and twisted. These men must be destroyed. Soon enough, you'll know what sort of man Jamal is.
I've passed your test then. What now?
Oh, my child. We've only just begun. I hold here a list. 9 names adorn it. 9 men who need to die. They are plague bringers, war makers. Their power and influence corrupts the land and ensures the crusades continue. You will find them. Kill them. In doing so, you'll sow the seeds of peace, both for the region and for yourself. In this way, you might be redeemed.
9 lives in exchange for mine.
A most generous offer, I think. Have you any questions?
Only where I need begin.
Very well. Ride for Damas. Seek out the black market merchant named Tamir. Let him be the first to fall. Be sure to visit the city's assassin bureau when you arrive. I'll dispatch a bird to inform the Rafik of your arrival. Speak with him. You'll find he has much to offer.
So,
You believe it best.
I do. Besides, you cannot begin your mission without his consent.
What nonsense is this? I don't need his permission. It's a waste of time.
It's the price you pay for the mistakes you've made. You answer not only to me, but all the Brotherhood as well now.
So be it.
Take your equipment and go. Prove that you are not yet lost to us.
so it's a really small and kind of silly thing, but does the phrase "assassin bureau" in a Middle Eastern accent sound weird to anyone else? Like, bureau is an incredibly French word. I just feel like if you're going to use the word assassin, they'd probably have another word for bureau. Anyway, check out these flappy flags that are definitely one giant square texture pinned at the top. Anyway, so this conversation about Orientalism in video games is pretty widespread, and there are lots of good people talking about it. Whoop! Interrupted.
It seems my students do not fully understand what it is to wield the blade. Perhaps you could show them what you know.
No! Damn it! Ah! More forced tutorial bullshit. Here we go.
Perfect. You must be busy. I
Cool.
understand.
Thank you. Let me the crap out of here. There's so much tutorializing in these games. I do not want to do any more Animus tutorials.
You must
So,
be busy. I understand.
can I get to a place where I can talk and move and do stuff without being interrupted? Oh, boohoo. Okay, cool. So, the Animus as a framing device is interesting, and the degree of interest it allows, and the number of interesting things it could do in a story, is almost directly in contrast with how boring they use it. So, the fundamental idea is bunk. It's just pure garbage, fake science. It's Velikovsky level nonsense, where the idea is that every single person inherits memories from an ancestor, which also would imply that everyone's DNA is getting like bigger every generation as chunks of the previous memory are like saved, or that there's just like a sort of a sorting algorithm that determines what were important memories enough to save, and both of those are nonsense. The idea that it's related to instinct is, kind of funny. But anyway, the Animus, what it lets you do, as far as like making a metaphor into a thing people can engage with, is the Animus metaphorizes the idea of our assumptions about memory. Right? Like, if you look into memories as a subject of study, you're going to find some amazing and incredibly creepy stuff. there's a thing your brain does called confabulation, where if your brain can't explain what happened between point A and point B, it will make something up. And it will make something up that you will think was true. It's kind of hard to prove confabulation for most people. You need, in many cases, some medical needs, like, for example, people who have had brain separation or traumatic or traumagenic amnesia. But basically, it is entirely possible your brain makes stuff up to tell you, and that stuff it makes up is stuff that you become immediately convinced is absolutely true. This is often one of the reasons why you might notice this in gamer behavior, where you think you did something because you had a plan, but your behavior before you did it indicates you didn't have a plan and you were just trying stuff. This might seem like, oh, they're making up lies to make themselves seem good, but they might not be. It might be your brain actually kicked in and was like, oh no, I clearly did think I meant to do that. So that's a weird thing brains do, and you can't stop it, and you often don't notice it. In fact, you're designed not to notice it. So confabulation is interesting, and there's nothing of that in Assassin's Creed. Memories are perfectly preserved, down to, as you can see, like, fine detail. Like, this arrangement of planks will not be different if I turn around and look back at it, which is another thing your brain does. Your brain fills in memories as best fits, which is why it's very hard to get photographic details. Eidetic memory, the idea of having a memory that works perfectly, even people with eidetic memories have a bunch of different varieties of eidetic memory, which can include people who remember text and timing perfectly, and people who remember physical, visual information perfectly. So those are all very interesting. But now, do we get a cutscene for horses? Oh, goody. We just get to get on a horse. Hello, horse! Let's go! Cool. And you can, of course, stealth on a horse. One of the things that amuses me about the notion of stealth in this setting is that it's just moving slowly is seen as stealthy. So, anyway, so the challenge of memory, and indeed the philosophical question of does your memory dictate who you are as a person, are all conversations that Assassin's Creed just ignores, just doesn't want to talk about them. No, in this, memory is a gateway to a video game level, and it's very, very clean. There are some points where they talk about the idea of trauma shutting off memories, and
vigilantes you have freed to block your pursuers and break their line of sight.
Thank you, Siri. But that idea of your memory being tainted by trauma is, as in this game, only really gets considered in terms of how it relates to kind of ramping in to your memory point. So, like, there's like one good idea, and they do something with that. There are some other ideas which are kind of like embarrassingly obvious, like the idea that maybe the person using the animus starts imposing their memories on the subject, like an issue of self-image. You could actually do like a super interesting trans narrative where someone flashes back into the mind of an ancestor who had a different body, and this gives the animus pilot an experience that helps them unlock and understand something about themselves. But this would involve an Assassin's Creed game with a trans character whose primary engagement with the plot would be one gigantic self-recognition trans metaphor, and Ubisoft aren't going to do that. They're ninnies. Alright. Whoop! Man, I really like this game when it's doing its good job well. Like when I could just roam around, get on a horse, climb around and stab bad people in the face. Like, I like that. That's fun. Okay. just going to canter on past these soldiers in a very normal speed. Again, so you might have noticed that, but the map markers are GPS markers, which is a little weird. In case you've forgotten, GPS stands for Global Positioning Satellite. There are probably no satellites around Earth at this point in time, though this being this being the Assassin's Creed universe, maybe there are really weird alien super space satellites. Who am I to say otherwise? All right. So here's another thing. The willingness to avoid NPCs. Like, your natural inclination to not run into people who are doing nothing to bother you. Like, on a purely... Like, you'll see this in speedruns where, because NPCs often don't impose a time penalty to move through, and moving around them does impose a time penalty, you might wind up with players in different games just plowing through NPCs and not caring that they're making people's lives worse. But by default, if you notice most people's ways of behaving, they will, typically speaking, avoid crashing into NPCs and being a giant ding-dong. And that's because we treat games like they matter. Indeed, it's actually seen as kind of a default assumption of, like, why wouldn't you be nice to the people who aren't imposing anything on your life, even though they're not people, they're a collection of data designed to evoke a person. So that's an interesting quandary there. Like, you know, how much do you accept the metaphorizing of... Oops, a daisy. Am I going to get shanked in the ghoulies here? Or am I going to be able to get around the corner of this building in a way that means this bloke doesn't notice me? Cool. And now we climb. One of my favorite things you could have done with Assassin's Creed and its whole ancestral memory thing was have an experience where you are dealing with the conflated memories of two parents at the same time. So you could tell this story from two different perspectives and confuse the Animus user who can't tell which of the two characters he's being at any given point in time. That seems like some great, I guess, Bioshock level, what a twist, video game assumptions language. But that's still cool. Like, I still think that would be a neat thing to do. Well, now I've got to creep around the back of this tower thing so this ding-dong doesn't get alerted. I mean, I could just stab him. I really could. It would be a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Because this is, you know, Assassin's Creed and these people don't exist and they've already lived their lives and died. But because we are treating this... Because I'm trying not to be a dick about this, we're going to just try and play this game in a reasonably nice fashion. Another thing is the idea of the self-image of the person you're dealing with. You, generally speaking, acting in a way that is appropriate to the character that you're trying to inhabit is a way to perform well. That's a fact of the game. It's made even more explicit in Assassin's Creed 2, where many times getting perfect ranks on things is done by doing things not just to the end Ezio had, but the way Ezio would have done them. That's a neat idea. And I like the way it like ties into the notion of technically you are playing the role of another person, and while that is cool, it also begs the question of how often are you actually doing that? Like, how certain can you be that that person's self-image and their memory of what they did do is reasonable? There might be, well, you could have done some fun things with things that were provably impossible, but because they were tied to the self-image of a character, it's like, well, no, that's how Ezio remembers him doing it. He definitely stabbed all 7 guys at once, and that lets you play with the way that our memory reflects on ourselves. And that's really cool. Another thing is what we actually consider to be a traumatic memory. In Assassin's Creed, one of the most obvious instances of a traumatic memory is getting stabbed in the gut, which is where this whole story here kicks off. And that's kind of basic. Like, yes, violence is a source of traumatizing memories, and indeed, post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder that messes with your ability to form memories. But there are so many other ways to do that. And what's more, the game has a metaphor for re-experiencing a memory, and it doesn't use it, which is really sad. When suffering through a post-traumatic stress disorder flashback, what happens is you are in the situation again. In extreme cases, you can be reliving the memory vividly to the point where you think you are in that location, and you start interpreting the world around you and the people around you as if they relate to that memory and not to the people in front of you. This is an idea that, gameplay-wise, metaphorizes perfectly in that you could have someone in the Animus try to reach a traumatizing memory, and because of something in that experience, they are literally triggered to go back to an earlier segment of the game, and then they have to navigate that segment of the game and maybe learn more about that segment of the game as they come to terms with what it is that's like changed in their life, or why that event is so difficult. And maybe then that could let them design the game levels so that suddenly you start seeing the trigger as a thing that you can avoid, or maybe a thing you can cope with and manage. It's an interesting concept space, and again, they don't do anything with that. It's just trauma shuts off memory space, and that's it. So, like, there's a lot of interesting stuff that the Animus just lays out there for a game developer to use. And they do, like, one interesting thing with it, and they kind of were gearing up to do a second interesting thing with it. But the problem is, well, spoilers, I guess, for Assassin's Creed's going forward. In that Assassin's Creed 1 came out, and then there was a sequel, Assassin's Creed 2. The premise at the end of Assassin's Creed 1 is that something about the Animus experience has changed Desmond, and that gives him the ability to do assassin stuff in real life. Assassin's Creed 2 frames a similar story of Desmond wanting to use his abilities to fight the Templars in the real world. So they put him into the memories of another assassin who does an extensive training montage, so they can, put him in that and get assassin abilities out of that. And then it all gets a little out of hand. Essentially, they treat this revisiting the memories of the past as a very explicit training mechanism, that all Desmond needs to do is to have his mind informed by these things, and therefore, once he is informed, he is capable of doing. That's a really interesting idea too, right there. That's a really interesting conception of power, because look, I know logistically the physical requirements to do some of the stuff that Altair here does. Like, I do know what's involved in doing a cat run. And let me tell you, knowing it has not made doing it any easier. You do need a level of physical fitness that I do not have, and I'm not going to get lying in bed watching videos explaining the process to me. Like, there is actually muscular development and subconscious muscle memory that gets involved. So it's an interesting idea. It plays into one of the favorite nerd fantasies as well, the idea that knowing is itself power. Which, joking aside, G.I. Joe, haha, knowledge is power and all that. But literally, in the context of Assassin's Creed, all you can bring out of the Animus is knowledge. You learn how to do things, and that knowledge changes your relationship to your body and to the world around you, but the fact is, you are a person who knows. And that's an interesting idea. Indeed, the thing you're currently gunning for in this game is knowledge. And, oh, by the way, by walking like a scholar on the rooftop, that gets people to stop paying attention to me. That's kind of weird. Alright. Come on, Blackie. Is that a bad name to give a horse? I don't know. It's black, so... Now I feel like an asshole. Anyway, so you have this conception of memory, you have this conception of power, and you have, again, this really cool framework of alternate history. And, like, hypothetically, like, real history. Like, there are some real-world characters that get mentioned. The locations in these places are like, real places, like Acre and Damascus are real cities. In fact, they're still around. And there was actually a bit of a fuss about whether or not it was kind of, like, sacrilegious to allow Altair to run around climbing on these very important historical locations. But that's part of why they put the disclaimer at the start of the game saying, hey, this is made by a bunch of people who aren't just a bunch of white guys doing whatever the hell they want as tourists. So, you know, that's something. But the idea of a historical setting in this particular chunk of history is super interesting, because this is not a chunk of history that tends to get a lot of treatment like this. Interestingly, most of the time, treatments of the Crusades tend to be really Orientalist, where you have this depiction of the West as being these noble, important, impressive figures coming in to correct the dreadful actions of the barbaric Muslims, and very little thought is given to the lives of the people in the setting. So hypothetically, by placing this story space where they have, there is actually like a really interesting, not shocking Orientalist angle to this. Like, what? Man, get stuffed. But like, Altair is Syrian. He is from this place. He is from this time. He is not a crusader or an outsider, and his actions are not being done in the name or service of the conventionally outside other who are treating this land as a place to exploit and use. So, like, that's legitimately nice. That's something that's kind of cool that this setting doesn't need to have, but is an improvement over typical depictions of it. And also,
The hidden blade during fight will allow you to quickly dispatch an enemy thrown to the ground.
thank you, Siri. And also, this characterization of the cities as being full of people doing different things. There are scholars, and there are... Ooh, Lord, I forgot how pretty this game is for what it's doing. Look at that. That's cool. That's really cool. Like that's not a set of like flat textures that I'm going to scroll past on the way to one puzzle. That is a place, and I can run around in it and climb on it, and I can stab people in it, which admittedly says more about me than about the place. But yeah, that's cool. Anyway, sorry. But the notion of this city as being a place full of people living their own lives and having their own lives is a way to run counter to an Orientalist narrative. Because this game is much bigger than it can actually handle, there is a challenge to it. But oh, hang on a second. Excuse me. I've got to just deal with this. All right. Here we go.
This is a waste of my time.
Alright, let's try and actually dispatch this guy cool ways. Strictly speaking, was that necessary? No. But, also... yeah.
Is that the last of them? I hope so. Still, best not to take any chances. I'll hurry home. Don't think I'll leave it again anytime soon, either. You've done me a kindness, young man. Be assured, I won't forget it.
Alright. Now, I just press spacebar once I get into this group, and I move with them, which is convenient and nice, and it has the implication that Altair doesn't need help doing this. Like, this is a second nature to him, so like as a mechanistic representation, it's kind of nice. So, as I was saying, like, one of the challenges with this game is it is so much bigger as a game than it can actually pull off. So, like, you do have this giant crowd of characters and, like, lots of different visual aesthetics. Like, every one of these guards looks at least a small bit different to the other guards. And they all fit a style. Everyone here looks like they belong here. But for the most part, because they have to try and make a giant space filled with very little in the way of like content, you get a lot of repetition. And that's a bummer, because it means that it reduces a lot of these characters from being like characters, I guess, and people, to being it's a lot easier to see these as characters as cardboard cutouts rather than sorry, bit much, I know.
Maybe you haven't noticed. How can one expect
You wish to die, so be it.
Sorry, busy.
Thank you, my boy. I only wish my sons were half as brave as you. I'll see to it that they hear this tale and know what it is to be a true hero.
Alright. So, like, it's a bit sad because it isn't actually necessary for them. They don't have to be trying to reduce these characters to this kind of stereotype, but just because the technical limitations for what they were trying to do are so big, it's very hard for them to have successfully breathed life into every part of this. So it doesn't matter how much... Jesus. It doesn't matter how much you may feel that they were trying to, you know, not make an Orientalist version of this narrative. There is still going to be this fact that most of the characters say a small number of things over and over again, and they are much more likely to feel like things than they are like people. And that's a bummer. That's a bummer because, like, it doesn't have to be that way. It's not like a game about this period of history with this kind of protagonist necessarily is going to have to be fundamentally othering. And I mean, like I said, like, Altair is probably the highest profile Muslim protagonist in video games. He is almost certainly the highest profile Syrian character in a video game. Anyway, so So I find this whole topic really interesting. As you might be able to tell, this is something that's coming off the cuff, but based on readings I've done, and based on my experiences of the Assassin's Creed games and their genre. And so, with the talk of memory, and with the talk of limitations, there's one last thing I want to do, and then we'll sign out, which is, if you see here, that's a river. Now, we have in this game a lot. So our filter for what we're seeing in this game is Altair. Altair is the character that we use to see everything that's going on in the setting. And that means that when Altair can't do something, that kind of implies it's because he can't do something. Like, if Altair presents us with an option of doing something and tries it and fails, that's because it's a thing that Altair was always going to fail at. And if Altair won't give us an option for doing a thing, that's probably a sign that it's something Altair in the past would never have tried. So here's a question for you. Why did he drown instantly? I find it very hard to believe that a dude who grew up in a desert and a place this cold can't swim. So I can't believe a guy that grew up in a desert that is this hot and this potentially uncomfortable with this kind of robes and with his level of athleticism can't swim. So I have a theory. I have a hypothesis. I have a hypothesis that the reason Altair drowns instantly is because he's super embarrassed about how he swims. So his memory rejects the image of himself in the water. Anyway, so that's this month's experiment in videos. Getting to play a game along with me, getting to watch how I play and hear me talk about ideas that the game evokes. If you like this kind of content, please let me know, because I find it interesting to do. And it's often a lot easier to do long-form stuff like this than it is to do the heavily edited videos. At the same time, I might have said a whole bunch of stupid crap and you think, no, I should go back to doing the essay structure. On the other hand, if you like this kind of thing, please let me know. And I already said that. See, I'm not very practiced at this. But the important thing is this is fun. I hope you enjoy watching it. And I hope to look forward to doing more content like this in the future. For I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to make content. Bye.